Good afternoon and welcome to the Henry Art Gallery Auditorium for the President's Spring Address. Now, please welcome the Dean and Vice Provost of Undergraduate Academic Affairs, Dr. Ed Taylor.
Thank you. Lin-Manuel Miranda, composer, lyricist, playwright, wrote a song for the second act of Hamilton, a song called "The Room Where It Happens." It's a song about Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton in a room bargaining over the nation's affairs, at a secret dinner table, as it were, dealing with unprecedented political matters. We are, in essence, in a room together, room where it happens. Yet so much of the work that Ana Mari Cauce has done has been about the work of opening doors, opening up access to rooms, and if not, pushing the walls down to access rooms altogether, where the work happens. I remember a couple of years ago being in a room, a YWCA event. There were 900 or more women together at a fundraiser. And I was sitting in the back of the room, because Ana Mari was a keynote speaker. And I was watching from the back of the room, and I was at a table, and a woman leaned over to me, and she said, "Have you heard President Ana Mari Cauce speak before?" She said, "I've met her at my daughter's elementary school. She was on the floor playing with my daughter. You're going to love her." Realized at that point I should have worn a name tag, but I said, I think I already do. In her first year as president, not interim president, but as president, there was a room where there was a group of faculty and staff and students who had come together to make a case to President Cauce that we knock down the walls of the university and that we host Tent City 3. This had been a request that had been made at least for a decade ongoing, when they got access to Ana Mari to sit and have the conversation. After a meeting in the room where it was to happen, Ana Mari said yes. She went on to describe her rationale. Organized tent cities, she said, are by no means a replacement for permanent housing, but they do provide a safe place for families and individuals to live until they secure stable housing. From scholarship to direct service, our university is helping tackle this pernicious challenge together. I look forward to welcoming the residents of Tent City 3 to our campus and know that our community will demonstrate what she called a welcoming, open spirit. A welcoming, open spirit. There was a room in Spokane, Washington, a couple of years ago, with a group of people in the room talking about medical access and the potential for a partnership around a medical school. Ana Mari was not in the room at the moment. The people that were in the room were local community members, a handful of Jesuits, some students, some trustees, some local business people that were having a discussion, not about whether or not a collaboration around medical school is a good thing, whether or not rural medicine was necessarily a good thing. The discussion was not about that. The debate and the discussion was about us. The debate was whether or not the University of Washington could really partner with a small liberal arts school in Eastern Washington, whether or not we really could partner. The questions were about us. They were questions about values, about ethical issues. When does life begin? When does life end, and who gets to decide? It's about questions at the heart of medical training, about care, compassion, issues of life or death. Can a small liberal arts university really partner with a big public university in that regard? Ana Mari was invited into the room and into the discussion for a 45-minute discussion. And at the end of the meeting, the decision was, yes, let's partner. The meeting ended with a group of people, Jesuits, local community members, standing and applauding. One gentleman said, "I've been in meetings in this region and in this room for 15 years and have never been in a more inspiring meeting. Let's get on with the business of preparing medical students for our community." In 2016, she was recognized by Parent magazine as a, quote, superhero, a selfless individual, change agent, dedicated to making life better for families and children in our state. On the list of superheroes that year for Parent magazine, it's a midwife, arts visionary, state teacher of the year, a jazz music teacher, and Ana Mari Cauce, who is described as being humorous, who is described as humble, self-effacing, and a leader in higher education. I looked at Ana Mari's calendar to see what room she's been in just recently, January 28th, the week of January 28th. This is a week, mind you. She began the week in Tri-Cities in Eastern Washington, in rooms there, talking about the importance of higher education. In the middle of the week, she was in Beijing, talking about Asian University Summit there, where she delivered a keynote address on the power of partnerships and what global research universities can do. That was the middle of the week. By the end of the week, she was back on campus with the Board of Regents. This isn't a week, talking about the importance of higher education. I was lucky to get back to my home in Montlake and back to campus in that week. Ana Mari is the 33rd president, and I do say Ana Mari, of the University of Washington. She joined the faculty in '86 and went on to become a Distinguished Teaching Award winner in 1991. And the list goes on. I can go on about her qualifications. You know them. She spent 30-plus years of her career in life around that which matters in making the case for higher education in this state, in this nation. She has spent her career devoted to the life of the mind and heart, to excellence, access in the public good and public work, and to assuring that there is room for all of us in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. I give you President Ana Mari Cauce.
Thank you so much, Ed. I certainly do a good job of, picking people to introduce. So, I hope it's not going down from here. No, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for turning out, the people who are in this room and the people who are in, they're virtually here, sitting in their offices, et cetera, trying to do work and maybe listening to this on the side. I think it's really important for us to come together every once in a while and talk about our values and talk about the things that unite us. And I think that that may be even more important at this particular moment than maybe not ever before, but certainly than at most moments. Over the last few months and years, it's really been hard to ignore what a recent Newsweek cover story called "The War on College." We're criticized, by that I mean universities are criticized for either coddling snowflake students who demand safe spaces and trigger warnings, or for our lack of socioeconomic diversity and coddling of wealthy students who demand lazy rivers. People say we cost too much. We don't prepare our students for jobs, leaving them with crippling debt and little of value. You've heard it all. This assault on higher education comes at a time when, in fact, the value of a college degree is actually stronger than ever. The need for a highly educated workforce continues to increase, as does the need for critical thinking skills that allow us to draw from the title of one of our own classes, called BS, on the onslaught of the questionable information that we're exposed to all the time. And quite frankly, our students are less privileged and more diverse than they were a few decades ago in every imaginable way. For those of us who are within the academy, those of us probably in these various virtual rooms, these criticisms are a bit of a head-scratcher. Obviously, there's something that's getting lost in translation. So today, I want to talk about our values. I want to talk about the value of higher education. I want to talk about our very purpose. This is relevant to our entire community because it's incumbent on us, on all of us, and by that I mean our staff, our students, our alumni and friends, as well as our faculty, to refute these two common myths and misperceptions. But I want to just let you know from the beginning that at times I'm going to be addressing the faculty more specifically. Because as educators, we have to consider what we're doing, or maybe not doing enough of, that has allowed these myths to take root. And I'm going to end with a call for members of the Academy, for the faculty, to look inward, examine our culture and our academic reward system, and whether it best serves us in this era of skepticism, volatility, and very rapid change. Truth is that the case for higher education is strong and compelling. The facts clearly suggest that higher education, and especially public higher education, contributes to the public good on a larger scale than perhaps any other institution. Because of their unique role in both education and research or knowledge production, universities are arguably the most powerful tool we have for increasing equity and social mobility across all our populations. A recent Pew Center study found that over the course of their work lives, college graduates, and I mean those who earn a bachelor's degree, earn between $500,000 to $1 million more than those who haven't earned a degree. And in addition, those higher earning jobs are also much more likely to have retirement benefits and health insurance, which adds to the earnings differential, the earnings differential that's sometimes referred to as the college dividend. College graduates are also 3 times less likely to be unemployed, and that's the biggest disparity that we've had in the modern era between those with and without a college degree. And that college dividend is much more than just monetary. Those with college degrees report not only better paying jobs, but more satisfying jobs. Degree holders have healthier lifestyles. They donate more to charity, are more likely to vote, and to demonstrate greater civic involvement. Traits that they pass on to their children and that support healthy democracies. What happens at our universities are the embodiment of, if you give someone a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach someone to fish, they eat for a lifetime, and so do their children. But you might ask, does the dividend outweigh the cost? We read that parents can't save enough to pay for college and students can't earn enough to work their way through. So they take on debt, and that can hamper them for decades. So what's true? Well, as you can see, and there's a slide up there that should be showing it to you, the answer depends on the higher ed sector. Those students carrying the largest debt come from the for-profit sector. Those with the lowest from public universities. And the average debt at the UW is even lower than the average debt at most public universities. Now, I want to be clear. $22,000 is nothing to sneeze at. I know that. I'm not trying to wave away the seriousness of student debt. And I really understand that the financial challenges of living and studying in a region where costs are climbing are very, very real. But certainly, let's be honest, for the vast majority of undergraduate students at the UW, the debt they incur to get their bachelor's degree is not enough to derail their future. And it doesn't even come close to outweighing the earnings premium or college dividend for degree earners. And the data bears that out. The student debt default rate for UW students is under 3%. It's also worth noting that the percentage of students who graduate with debt varies widely by the type of institution, and that among undergraduates at the UW, nearly 60% graduate without any known debt at all. Again, I am not trying to make light of $22,000 for the average debt for those students that have it. But again, compared to what we're reading, it's kind of a very different story. So the next question we have to ask is, who benefits the most from this college dividend? Is it, as some say, just the rich getting richer? Again, it depends. In fact, one of the things that any college student will learn is the right answer to almost anything is, it depends. According to the Equality of Opportunity report that was written in 2017, so this is recent data, on average, Ivy League colleges have more students from families in the top 1% of the income distribution than students from the entire bottom half of our country's earners. So in some places, that notion of it's the rich getting richer is in fact true. And way too often when the public, and even more so East Coast journalists and politicians, think about colleges and universities, it's the Harvards and Yales and Princetons that come to mind. After all, a third of our presidents, including the one now in office, have received their degrees from Ivy League schools, as do almost a quarter of our current U.S. senators. This might surprise you, but every one of our current Supreme Court justices attended either Harvard or Yale Law School. Is that diversity? We can have that conversation later. But given that, it's not surprising that perceptions of universities are so colored by this small handful. But in truth, when that small handful, when Ivy League colleges come to represent all students and all institutions of higher education, it stereotypes both. Elite private universities undoubtedly play an important role in the higher ed ecosystem. There's no question about that. But there's also no question that in the role of the public imagination, it's outsized. In fact, the vast majority, about 80% of all college degrees are earned at public colleges and universities, where many, if not most students, are low to middle income. And these students are reaping the college dividend too. In public universities with tuitions generally under $15,000 a year for in-state students, and financial aid available through scholarships, grants, and low-cost loans, many, in fact most, public colleges and universities remain within reach for in-state students. And in this past decade, about a half dozen public universities have started programs that offer free tuition to low-income to low-middle income students. That includes our own Husky Promise, which is now in its 10th year. Now, while tuition isn't the only barrier for low-income students, addressing what's called sticker shock up front is important to attracting and admitting those students. Since we started the Husky Promise, about 40,000 have attended the University of Washington tuition-free. This year alone, we have about 10,000 students across our 3 campuses who pay no tuition. Most get additional money towards room and board. Talk about free college. It already exists. A college degree is within financial reach for many more students than many people realize. At the UW, about 30% of our students are first generation, the first in their family to go to college. And for me, one of the things that's especially gratifying is the fact that when low-income students graduate from high-quality universities, like the University of Washington, there is no income differential later in life between them and their high-income peers. The leveling effect is real. And by the way, the leveling effect happens when there's both access and excellence. That combination of access and excellence benefits low-income students more than anybody else. Colleges like ours that have both access and excellence are one of the best and most effective vehicles for social mobility, serving the goals of equity and social justice that all of us hold dear. Social mobility happens, unlike the stereotypes some are pushing, because our students actually don't spend day after day cloistered alone in dusty garrets reading obscure tomes. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In fact, ancient tomes can be refreshingly current in their insights. One of my favorites, which I recently gave to my niece, a UW grad, parent to a 4- and 2-year-old, is called "If Aristotle's Kid Had an iPhone, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Parenting." So there is nothing wrong with ancient tomes, but we do much more than that. First of all, as you all know, our classrooms have changed. Some of them are even flipped. And in addition to the incredible learning, questioning, and discovery that takes place inside of them, students also take advantage of a variety of opportunities outside of the class. Opportunities to do travel, to do research, to attend evening lectures, plays, dance recitals, to take internships. that can alter the course of their lives. Those who earn a degree are signaling, as some have called it. But what they're signaling to employers is determination and discipline. They've demonstrated that they can undertake the challenge of starting and finishing a degree program, that they've spent time in a diverse and dynamic environment. They're signaling that they've been challenged by a broad set of views and perspectives on a wide range of topics, and that they've learned to think critically about them. And quite frankly, our students are the least coddled generation of students ever. They're the most diverse and in every manner imaginable, including socioeconomically, ethnically, and culturally. This is the most diverse generation of students we've ever had before, and the least coddled. Some of you have heard me talk about my experience when I went to graduate school at Yale. I lived in the dorms, and there was a big dorm and a bathroom in between, and then a smaller dorm room. And I was very lucky. I got the big straw and got the big dorm with, a little fireplace and all of that. And someone got the not so good one. They did pay less for it, but nonetheless. And, asking around, because it was such a big difference, the small room was where students brought their valets with them. Talk about coddled. Historically, in fact, our universities have been pretty homogeneous, and students have had no reason to examine or even be aware of their privilege. Today, they run into those who ask, even demand that they do so, that they check their privilege, so to speak. These collisions can be uncomfortable, there's no doubt about it, but they better prepare students to participate in a workforce and in a world that's diverse and global. And these collisions, uncomfortable as at times that may be, teach them how to engage in a world in its fullness, not just to interact with a small piece of it. And this too adds to the value of their degree, because our aim is also to shape responsible, caring citizens who understand difference and the need for engaged social action. Now, in addition to what they do for individuals who actually attend them, universities also lift up the economy of the community, region, and state in which they're located, and well beyond. Companies seek to locate in areas home to a well-educated workforce and highly talented producers of knowledge. In Amazon's search for a second headquarters, they made very clear that the presence of a nearby research university was one of their criteria. Employers want the students we graduate, and the competition for talent is especially great right here in our region. Right now, Washington is among the top 10 states in the nation for jobs that require a 4-year degree. But we're in the bottom 10 for the number of students who earn these degrees. Talk about a mismatch. That's one of the reasons why at times I get concerned when people say you don't need a college degree. I am all 100% into workforce training. This state needs more students with college degrees. And by the way, when I say that employers want our students, I'm not just talking about STEM degrees, although we do really well here. In fact, about 40% of our students graduate with a STEM degree. But employers hire our students across the board, whether they graduate in business, education, public health, sociology, history, or the arts. Our students are our state's, our nation's future teachers, social workers, healthcare providers, lawyers, entrepreneurs, legislators, and much more. And we provide them hands-on project-based learning, the kind of learning that employers look for when they hire. The same goes for leadership experiences and global perspectives. Our undergraduates often begin their first job already having acquired significant experience through internships, public service, and research. In fact, last year, about 9,000 students worked with faculty to produce, I love this number, 1.4 million hours of research. Pretty cool. Our graduates drive the economy by filling the positions employers need, and often together with faculty, they create jobs. They start their own businesses. not only fill jobs, they create jobs. A study conducted in 2014 found that across our 3 campuses, the UW generates $12.5 billion a year in economic impact. Almost 1 in every 50 jobs in our state, about 80,000, are attributable to the UW, more than half of them in health and medicine. We return about $200 million more to the state and local governments through taxes than what the state contributes to our operating budget. And that's not to mention the $417 million a year in uncompensated care that we provide to the state's poorest residents, or what our faculty, staff, and students contribute directly through philanthropy and volunteer work. There should be no question. I want to make sure that no one in this university, that everyone understands what we contribute to students' lives and what we contribute to the state's economy and to the state's well-being. It's important that we all know this because it's very different than at times what we read about in the press and what we hear. And it's important that we know what the truth is and when to call BS. As John F. Kennedy noted in his address at the UW for our 100th anniversary, and this is a direct quote, "I think this university and others like it across the country," he was referring to public universities, "and its graduates have recognized that these schools are not maintained by the people of the various states in order to merely give the graduates of these schools an economic advantage in the life struggle. Rather, these schools are supported by our people because our people realize that this country has needed in the past and needs today as never before educated men and women who are committed to the cause of freedom." This statement is every bit as timely today as it was then, perhaps even more so. And then, of course, as a research university, we also serve the public through discovery. The knowledge produced by our nation's research universities is transforming our capacity to treat and eliminate devastating diseases from HPV to Ebola. It's advancing clean energy technology, which future generations will thank us for. It's demonstrating how social work, psychology, and technology can combine to help reduce teen suicides, and how historical analysis can help us understand how we got here and how we can avoid the mistakes of the past. It's about art, music, dance, and poetry that inspire creativity and make our lives brighter and more fulfilling. In fact, it would be hard to find a person on this entire planet whose well-being has not been improved or empowered by advances rooted in university research. So despite the troubling rhetoric dismissing the impact of universities, the truth is that most Americans, in fact over 70%, agree at least that funding for research that pays off is a good use of public funds. But sometimes the payoff isn't obvious, like when you discover penicillin. We all know that's good. But sometimes it can be challenging to demonstrate the payoff for work that can take years or decades to show its value. Research gains are often incremental, and progress is sometimes unpredictable. We might not see the impact of basic or curiosity-driven science in the short term, but actually, in the long term, that research can be truly monumental. Its impact is and has changed the world. An example that I like to think of because it's so obvious is the laser. Okay? It was created in an attempt to understand the cosmos. I like to think of it as they were people who were trying to touch the face of God, to understand how we came into being. But it ended up being a vital tool for making surgery more precise and less invasive. If anyone has had laser surgery, it is as close as there is to magic. You can usually come home the same day. You heal so much faster. And that's not even to mention the role of lasers in terms of listening to music, etc. But again, all of this came from the desire of physicists to understand the beginning of the cosmos. Or more recently, we have the work of our most recent Nobel Prize winner in physics, David Thouless. His work in theoretical physics, and I'm not going to try to explain it, but it opened up entirely new fields of research with implications for electronic devices, everything from advanced supercomputers to quantum computers to other applications that we still can't imagine today. Basic research, curiosity-based research does pay off. And universities are pretty much the only place where that is taking place. You know, when I've just kind of, touched upon and glossed upon the case for higher ed, but, on its very face, it's hard to square evidence this strong for the value of a college degree and what universities bring to society with a rising tide of public distrust. Like I said, it's a head scratcher. Having said that, we ignore it at our peril. The consequences of not addressing public sentiments are real. State disinvestment, lack of federal support for research, or financial aid for students. All of these things are ultimately bad, not only for those of us who learn and work at universities, but for all of society. So what I want to talk about now is, what do we do about it? What change do we need to catalyze? I think we need to begin by looking at where we are. Last fall, and here's where I'm going to be addressing the faculty specifically, but I think all of us should listen in on it. Last fall, the journal Science published an article aimed at aspiring faculty. Its headline was, "Hoping for a faculty job? Here's what hiring committees are looking for." I'm sure if you were, about to graduate, with your PhD and looking for an academic job, you might read that article. I would suspect a number of people did. In the article, an anthropology professor turned academic career coach offered this advice, and I'm quoting, "Applicants often write cover letters that are too long and filled with emotion-related statements such as 'I am passionate about' or 'I strongly believe in.' She advises her clients to write concise cover letters that focus on research outcomes in terms of published peer-reviewed articles because any other focus is going to harm them rather than help them on the job market." I don't know about you, but that paints a pretty dismal picture of our career and what we care about. Just try to imagine any other profession in which declaring a passionate interest for the work counts as a mark against you. Yet for many of us, the truth is it was passion that drew us to our work. You didn't go to graduate school for X number of years if you weren't passionate about what you were doing. In fact, I see it as our mission to inspire that passion in the students we teach, mentor, and collaborate with. A passion about ideas, about learning, about community, about making the world a healthier place to live for their generation and the ones that will follow. Yet, this advice in science has a familiar ring to me. I suspect it does to other faculty out there. I'm not saying that all faculty subscribe to this thinking, but I can certainly tell you that some junior faculty do fear that if they color outside the lines of the conventional tenure track and promotion structure, it's not going to work out well for them. In fact, the implicit, if not explicit, and sometimes it really is very explicit message they get is, don't waste your time on speaking to non-academics, or writing for the popular media will make you seem less serious. I actually heard that once. I actually even heard that don't do research on things that you care about because it's called me-search. Anyone else hear that? They also hear service or community or civic involvement is great, but don't do too much of it before tenure. Actually, after either. Now, as academics, we've dedicated our professional lives to developing expertise. And we're acknowledged for sharing it with other academics through publication in peer-reviewed journal. And that is how it should be in research universities like ours. It's by speaking to peers that we advance the research mission and build a knowledge base in our fields. It should be valued. I want to be very clear. I value tremendously publication in peer-reviewed journals. I am not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that we should not value those things. What I'm suggesting is we shouldn't undervalue sharing that knowledge and understanding more broadly. in ways that inspire, that inform, and in fact, help to better our communities and our world. So, at the risk of endangering my own tenure, at least in this job, I want to say that I strongly believe that some aspects of our academic culture need to change for the long-term health of higher education, and dare I say, for the people that we serve and who pay our salaries. I'm asking us to think seriously about what activities we value and incentivize, and what activities we seem to merely tolerate, or at worst, just dismiss. A recent Scientific American survey of chairs of U.S. and Canadian medical departments revealed almost no support for efforts by junior faculty to communicate about their work to non-scholarly audiences. Quote, because it does not count toward attaining tenure or promotions. The only things that count are publishing research in respected journals, getting grants, teaching, and service on a university committee. But change is in the air. Georgia Tech is discussing ways to recognize outreach when assessing promotions and making plans to teach scientists the skills to write and to speak publicly. The University of Michigan has undertaken a new initiative to reimagine and expand public engagement. The National Science Foundation now provides grants specifically to address public outreach. And the American Sociological Association, thank God for sociologists, actually recommends that public engagement be considered when granting tenure and promotion. And great things are happening right here in the UW as well. The College of the Environment is an example, where faculty are increasingly called upon to share knowledge that can inform some of society's most critical decisions related to climate change and impacts, has created resources to support faculty in talking about their work. Their events, trainings, and opportunities to share the impact of teaching and research send a strong signal that the UW supports public engagement and provides expertise to prevent and mitigate environmental impacts. Or, in collaboration with UW News last year, 37 faculty across the UW contributed 44 articles to something called The Conversation. The Conversation is an innovative nonprofit that pairs faculty experts with journalists to write about issues of public interest for major media outlets. News outlets can then republish them for free, another way to combat the tide of misinformation that masquerades as news. Last year, Professors Rajesh Rao and James Wu from the Center for Sensory Motor Neural Engineering wrote about the melding of mind and machine. This piece was picked up by Scientific American and by CNN, among others. Or there was the history professor Lori Marhofer's article on protesting in response to white nationalism that was voted the year's most memorable article by the Conversation's readers and editors. That's impact. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. When I talk about engagement, I'm not just limiting it, though, I want to be clear, to public speaking and writing. I think that is a very important part of engagement, and I think we should be encouraging and incentivizing and rewarding our faculty that does that. But I'm also talking about the incredible work that's happening to integrate scholarship with community activism and involvement, a shift in thinking that we need more of. As an example, Urban at UW Homelessness Research Initiative has more than 70 faculty from disciplines across the UW who are engaged in homelessness-related community-embedded research, teaching, and service. Or there's Professor Lilo Pozo, who through her work with the Clean Energy Institute is installing solar paneled microgrids in Puerto Rico as part of a research project that both advances our knowledge and serves humanity. Or this one I particularly like. Our School of Music is about to begin its 10th year of a project in the Toppenish White Swan to enrich and entice learning in and through music on the Yakima Reservation. These young people are expressing through song their hopes and dreams of who they want to become of how they wish to connect to their heritage and the ways they hope to help their families. That's passion. That's inspiration. That's impact. It's really a testament to our faculty's profound passion and commitment to our great public mission that together with staff and students, they put so much time and energy to work that quite frankly is not well rewarded come tenure and promotion or even through merit raises. Indeed, despite our reward systems, great work is happening and it has impact. The impact is all around us. So what I'm asking us to do, and again, I'm particularly looking to faculty here, is to think about how can we share more about this extraordinary work? How can we explore even more ways to serve people? How can we find better ways to connect so that the people of Washington can say with confidence, I trust the University of Washington. I value what it does for our state, what it does for me. Now, the question of how we might reimagine rewards and incentives for our faculty to go public is not one that I'm at all proposing to answer alone. That responsibility lies with us as a university faculty and as faculty involved, not just here at the university, but in our professional networks and organization. It's a lot longer and a much more complicated conversation, and it's not something that I'm suggesting we can do in a top-down manner. What I'm suggesting, the conversation we need to have, the changes we need to make, are not for me to decide. They're for you to decide. Now, what I can and will do is try my best to set an example in my own role as president, as well as to celebrate the efforts of others, saying loudly and clearly that I value public scholarship, that I value community partnerships, that I value community and professional service, that they're essential to the health of our university and to our public mission. That's why I'm so supportive of our current effort to earn the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification. This distinction recognizes colleges and universities with an institutional focus on community engagement. In applying for this elective classification, we're looking hard at ourselves and our relationships with our community. We're looking at what we're doing across the university to collaborate and engage with the people of Rainier Valley, Yesler Terrace, Colville, the Tri-Cities, communities all across Washington State and beyond. This is a values-driven exercise that places our core values of public service, value, of place, and trust at the center of our analysis. And I look forward to sharing more about these efforts as it progresses. As president, I serve as an ambassador for the UW with many stakeholders. And whether it's Bellingham or Beijing, my goal is the same: to share our great work and why it matters. As I say with full confidence, we are the university for Washington and ultimately for the nation and for the world. Sometimes the incredible people who live and work in our state and beyond, in cities, large and small, urban or rural, share their concerns with me. Whether in communities fearing our almost mind-numbing growth or communities worried that we've been left behind, in every case, they want a better world for their children, for our children, for their community. What I'm asking us to do, beginning today, and again, it's not something that we haven't started talking about, is to have that conversation, to think about how we do that. How do we incentivize that? How do we make sure that we can attract, retain, and promote those faculty who absolutely are publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but also who are out there making the world a better place, talking about our mission, engaging young people and old, and making this university totally fulfill our public mission. I'm really looking forward to see where this conversation goes. This is just the beginning. Thank you. I'm more than happy to take questions.
That was my part.
Okay,
She's more than happy to take questions.
He's more than happy to take questions, too.
We've got time for just a few questions, so, and there are microphones on the outside if you wouldn't mind keeping your questions concise.
Yeah.
I'll be brave.
Go for it.
Do the voice? Okay. I can't argue with anything you said. I can, and I applaud it. However, in my now 35 years of faculty experience, there have been faculty that have been doing exactly what you're saying for years.
Yes.
They're a minority because they are a minority
Okay.
because we're not rewarded for it. I let that slip out. I'm one of these people that does outreach and things like that. But I've done the other stuff too. We're rewarded for research. In some schools, we're rewarded for teaching. Not all. So, and there's variance, there's going to be that variance. My point is that people have always been doing this, but unless the faculty code changes, ultimately, that it's recognized as an important part of the university's faculty mission, the same thing will continue to happen. That the people that do will do, and the people that don't, for whatever reasons, won't. I don't know, that's not a question, but I guess you could comment
No,
on
I mean,
that.
I certainly can comment on that. I mean, obviously I'm giving this talk because in essence I agree with much of what you say. I mean, I do think that most faculty do some of it, but it's a matter of to what extent. And quite frankly, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that everybody needs to do this. Sometimes we talk about, it's not a one model fits all. I mean, we all know of some people, some of whom happen to be on the faculty, that are brilliant in the lab, but quite frankly aren't very good at communicating. And no matter what you're going to do, that's not going to be their forte. And I do not in any way, shape, or form want us to not value that. As I've said before, the person in the lab who is, going to come up with a vaccine for HIV has every bit as much value as the person who's out there working directly with populations of people who have it. So it's not a one model fits all. And I think that there needs, but my issue, and it sounds like yours, is more that this counts for everything and that counts for nothing. And I wouldn't say it's 100% that way, but it's in that direction. Quite frankly, this is a discussion we need to have. This is a decision for the faculty. I actually am not big on, doing things top down. But the reason why I, do have the courage, so to speak, to give this talk is I actually think I'm talking for a lot of faculty, and particularly for a lot of junior faculty who are coming in, and they came to the university to do this, and then are being told by their senior peers, not now. And one of the things I do when I go to on the faculty field trip, I sometimes do these fireside chats. And I always get asked, what big piece of advice do you have? And I often tell them, the rest of your life begins now. You're going to be told by a bunch of people not to do anything for the next 6 years but this. And at the end of those 6 years, everything you've done, that's the person you've become. And so, again, it's not that I want anyone not to be thinking about publishing and where they publish, et cetera, but don't just, this is who I'm going to be for the next year so I can really be that person. It doesn't work real well. But my own sense, and this is just my sense, is that it's not so much a question of changing the faculty code, but it's really about how do we really interpret it? The faculty code leaves room for service. Quite frankly, a lot of what I'm talking about, for example, for myself, I have been very active in the community because it's part of my research. And I do community engagement, I do research with homeless populations, et cetera. A lot of this is ways of getting knowledge. For example, in my field, I'm a child clinical psychologist. One of the things that's really interesting is that a lot of the work that gets done in the lab in terms of interventions, et cetera, doesn't translate well into the field. And actually part of how we learn is we take these theories, we take these models that we've learned in the lab. That is the best place to start. But when we take them out into the community and we see what works and doesn't, it then changes our theory and we bring that back. I actually think this will lead to better research. I also think it's part of teaching. So I think there are ways that we can do this within the code that we have. I honestly think it's more about culture change and more about changing our mindset than about changing the pieces of paper that I think are really very important. Kathy? I'm taking your role.
That's my job. Kathy.
I have a tendency to do that.
Thanks a lot. Kathy Woodward, Department of English, and also Simpson Center for the Humanities. Another way to help produce this change, which I think is absolutely so important, is to clearly and explicitly address it in our departments in terms of our graduate education and training. So for example, I'm very proud in the English department that we've written into a paragraph about what a dissertation might look like. We've written in that it can take the shape of a public scholarship project. That's actually huge. And I really look forward to seeing the results. We're also sponsoring, this is the Simpson Center for the Humanities with Mellon support, which is wonderful, to reimagine the PhD and reach new publics. We are offering course development funds for our faculty across the humanities, humanistic, social sciences to recalibrate their graduate seminars so that it has an explicit and large public scholarship dimension. So that means that people, our students, our grad students, are seeing modeled what this life could look like differently so that they don't wait those 6 years. No. We say yes differently, in other words.
Yeah, no, the truth is, if I were talking about this cold, this would go nowhere, but that I really am building on a lot of efforts and a lot of talk that's already going out there. One of the things that I love is, for example, NSF, it used to be, what are your top 5 publications? And now it's one of your top 5 products, and it expands that more. I love the fact that the College of Engineering is counting patents, which didn't used to be the case. Again, that's a different way of looking at impact. That may not be a college, that may be community engagement, but it's also that sense of let's look at impact more broadly. One of the things that was very influential to me, and as there was at some point, how I ended up getting into administration, interestingly enough, was my first administrative role was as director of the clinical training program in psychology. It was actually the year I got tenured before it was official. So, sometimes we tell people don't do administration until you're my age. Well, I was still in my 30s, early 30s, as a matter of fact. And a lot of why the past chair of the clinical program thought I should do it is because I was engaged in national work, and it was important for that to come back to the department. But somewhere along the line, I was seen. I can think of a particular colleague that will remain nameless who was publishing a lot, but whenever she got asked to do anything, said no. And I'm sure there were good reasons for it, et cetera, but who really did not. I don't do that. I do this. And I started feeling like a bit of a chump. And I think that sometimes, I know people who at times feel that way. I'm doing all this, I'm doing all that, I love it, but, am I being foolish? And as I was, just coincidentally, but like in the middle of trying to think, am I doing things wrong, so to speak, that year, and I don't know exactly how it happened, I don't know if it was just the psychology department or the College of Arts and Sciences more generally, et cetera, but those were in the days of steps. In terms of raises, they were done in chunks, decided, and I don't know if it was one person per department, I don't know exactly how it was done, but I got a step for my excellence in service. And I've got to say, it meant the world to me. I can still remember that. And so, I'm not talking about a wholesale change, but I think there are things at the edges that we might be able to think about doing. And I happen to be one of these people that think that small things matter a lot. I think one of the biggest disincentives that we have is the respect that sometimes we don't give to these efforts, even more than the monetary or the tenure or promotion, is that sometimes we don't, in fact, it's like, gee, you publish something in Parent Magazine. And they look at you like, this diminishes you. And so I think there are things that we can do immediately, and I think that there are things that we can do more long term. If not, I wouldn't be talking about it. I think it's doable to make a real difference here.
We have time for one more question.
And that's because I answer in paragraphs. I'm a little bit like the person you were talking at the beginning about.
Lecture.
It wasn't a hand up. She was, oh, I'm sorry.
Over here.
Oh, there you were.
Okay, all right.
I was very inspired by it, and I really believe in much of what you say. But I'm wondering how you see this vision of the university and what we must do fitting in with the online courses and the growing that growing part of the university. It seems to be you're really talking primarily about face-to-face engagement in the classroom.
I don't think it's an either or. And in fact, the course that I was referring to, the Calling BS course, does have a huge online presence. And what that course is about is taught by, I believe it's two. I know one of the faculty members in the College of Information. I don't know if the other one's in biology still. But in any case, what the course does is it really gives people materials to help them really look beyond and examine critically articles, newspaper articles, and get at what's the truth here, because we've become fairly good at times of writing things that seem to be something that they're not. I mean, it's a real issue. And so I think that the series of online work that comes from that course is an example of public engagement. So I don't think it's an either or. I definitely, look, I'm I'm a psychologist. I believe that there's something special about face-to-face. But I also think that online is beginning to be much more interactive. I mean, I taught a correspondence course years ago, and I taught it partly because everyone was saying that, how horrible those courses were. This was when it was done, there was no, it was even before email. I mean, people were actually sending in through the mail. I mean, I know, I'm ancient. My dissertation was done on cards. So, if you want to know how old I am. But, and I even found then that it was much more engaging than you would have thought about. And in fact, this course was in abnormal psychology. And people often told me much more about the assumptions that came from personal experiences, mental illness of their own, of their family members, et cetera, than they ever would have told me in a class. I think there are pluses and minuses to almost every medium. So I don't think it's either one or the other. I think that one can do very community-engaged, public-engaged work through online courses and, in fact, on online. Thank you. Let's keep talking.